Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Ready as ever.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Use my outside voice. All right, thank you. We've got a great presentation coming up. We've got 30 plus people or so online watching, so we're going to try to stick on time. My name is Nick Phelps. It's my pleasure to introduce Nichole Angell. She earned an undergraduate degree in New York before coming to Minnesota. When she first got here, she started as a watercraft inspector with Chisago County. Then she spent a little time early in the pandemic as a COVID tech, testing samples. And then she joined our lab about 2 years ago. She quickly established herself as a leader, and many of you know her in those roles as the chair of the Graduate Fellows Group for the Minnesota AIS Research Center. She's also co-president of the Water Resources Students in Action Group. And her reputation as a go-to resource, a colleague and friend to everybody here. It's impressive to see the room full in the summertime for a thesis defense, so it's well-deserved. She has definitely earned the reputation. One thing that has impressed me in particular about Nichole is her commitment to science communication as part of a research process. She's done the academic thing. She's prepared 2 chapters that you'll see for publication. She's presented at scientific conferences. She's done good data management and made things publicly available. But she's also communicated very effectively, I think, with end users, state and local managers. She's made herself available through presentations, recordings, lots of meetings, written content to try to break down this technical information into ways that people can actually use it. Excuse me. She's also been equally effective as communicating the value of her research to the public. And that's particularly impressive. She's maintained a professional presence through social media. She's written magazine and newsletter articles to the broad public. And she's given public presentations to a wide variety of stakeholder groups. And it's funny to think just in the last few weeks, she's presented what you're going to see today to a small group in a cafe in northern Minnesota. Yesterday, she was presenting to the National Invasive Species Council's ANS task force. And now she's going to present it, the same content in a longer form as a thesis defense. And each time she does this, I've had these opportunities to watch her. She does it in an understandable and compelling way for each of these different audiences. So that's always been very impressive with her project. Her work has not gone unnoticed. She's won multiple Best Presentation Awards during her degree. She's received a fellowship, and she's won multiple student travel awards to present her work at various venues. And assuming that all goes well today, she's going to really be missed as part of the Phelps Lab. She's been a key person in our group. But we are excited to see her take the next step in her adventure. She's moving to North Carolina shortly after this with her partner, where she's going to start a remote position with the Great Lakes Commission as part of their AIS group. So we'll still be in contact, hopefully, for years to come. So thank you very much and enjoy the show.
All right, I'm going to turn these lights off so we can see the screen a little bit better here. Nick, have you started the recording for those that want it? All right, awesome. All right, thanks for the introduction, Nick. And thanks to all of you for coming. It's so nice to see so many familiar and some unfamiliar faces in the room. I'm excited to share with you what I've learned about aquatic invasive species and the cost effectiveness of prevention techniques over the past few years. So to get right into it, I'm going to give you a lay of the land here. First, we'll go over some background, why this matters, why should we be studying AIS issues. We'll get into chapter 1, looking at the effectiveness of AIS preventions, then chapter 2, looking at the costs, and then move into some management implications and future directions for this work, and have hopefully lots of time for questions and acknowledgements at the end. I just wanted to mention, I'll probably interchangeably use the terms we and I in this presentation. This was a really collaborative effort, and I'm really thankful for all those that made this possible. I'll also probably refer to aquatic invasive species as AIS throughout this presentation. All right, so getting into it. Why does this matter? Why should we study aquatic invasive species and prevention efforts being implemented? the reality is that invasive species are an issue that are really changing our waters. I bet everyone in this room is impacted by aquatic invasive species in some way, shape, or form. Maybe you're a boater and you deal with zebra mussels getting stuck on your boat. Maybe you're an angler and you deal with spiny water flea getting stuck on your fishing line and clogging up your fishing reel. Maybe you're an unconventional water recreationalist like the seaplane pilot that deals with plants getting stuck on their rudders and floats and being transported to really pristine and vulnerable locations. But this last one I think we can all resonate with is that a lot of us in this room are field biologists that are out on the water experiencing AIS issues firsthand, whether it's having to decontaminate equipment between sites or having to deal with the permitting process. I know for this research, it took a long time just to get a permit to be able to transport dead aquatic invasive species, let alone live ones. So the reality is everyone's really impacted by these. And this is why money is continually being poured into AIS issues and AIS research. Just in the state of Minnesota, $10 million is being spent, over $10 million is being spent by the state to mitigate these issues. And then on top of that, the state allocates another $10 million to counties to spend on prevention plans. And then on top of that, we have local entities like lake associations, watershed districts contributing another over $6 million and over 1 million volunteer hours. And this doesn't even take into account, the federal dollars being spent by USGS, US Fish and Wildlife Service. So the reality is we have this really complex and multifaceted issue moving through the human system, and it's impacting not only human health, the environment, but also the economy. And this complexity gives reason as to why aquatic invasive species management is really, really difficult. Managers have to make decisions in the face of uncertainty, but they have a lot of different levers to pull. But what we do know right now is that prevention is our most cost-effective form of intervention. So, control eradication efforts are usually really costly and have a high failure rate. Monitoring early detection is often difficult because invasive species exist in low abundance at first, so it's hard to find them until their population really booms. So right now, prevention is our best solution because it stops the invaders from being introduced in the first place, saving millions of dollars in maintenance and control costs down the road. And we do have examples of prevention being really, really successful. Take this example from summer of 2022, a watercraft inspector stopped starry stonewort, a detrimental invasive macroalgae, from being introduced into Lake Superior. Since starry stonewort was first infested in a Minnesota lake into Lake Coronis, Coronis had spent millions of dollars in managing just this one invasive. So imagine if starry would have been introduced into Superior, which is orders of magnitudes time the size of Coronis. So it's success stories like these why we continue to fund these different prevention efforts. And I really wanted to, with my research, help managers be able to spend those funds wisely. But first, I don't want to discount all the research that's already been done concerning prevention efficacy. These studies have been extremely instrumental in developing standardized protocols for inspection and decontamination. Because of these studies, we know what temperature is needed to kill certain invasive species using hot water. We know how invasive species are kind of moving through the border pathway, and we know how prevention campaigns are, really impacting that. So, we know how these preventions are working at the efficacy level, but, I really wanted to take this research a step further to better understand, what's the effectiveness of these preventions? How are they being done in the field with the folks that are actually doing them? So in comes chapter 1, looking at the effectiveness of AIS preventions. And when we think about this, first I had to decide, which preventions do we want to focus on? So we reached out to managers and they told us which ones they're implementing. And those were odor education, watercraft inspection, and hot water decontamination. So just for some background here, boater education is a process of teaching boaters best management practices for inspecting and removing AIS from their boat. This can be in the form of signs at boat launches, billboards along the roadways, radio ads, workshops, all sorts of things. Watercraft inspection is a process where a trained inspector will sit at a boat launch and intercept boats coming in and out of the lake to inspect that boat and remove invasive species from that boat. Hot water decontamination is a process completed after a watercraft inspection if the boat is deemed fit. So if there is an invasive species on the boat that cannot be removed by hand, a decontaminator will come in with a unit that uses hot water and high pressure to both kill and remove that invasive species on the boat. So, these are the preventions that we're going to be focusing on for this first chapter. So like I mentioned before, we really wanted to understand what is the real life effectiveness of these three preventions. So I decided to host these experimental boat inspections to kind of capture that, realism. Here's a high level overview of what those, experimental inspections entailed. But basically, we traveled to boat launches across the state of Minnesota. We had a typical fishing boat that we purposely planted aquatic invasive species on. And then we recruited participants, boaters, inspectors, decontaminators to come and inspect and remove items from the boat as if it were their own boat. So we had this boat, placed it at launches, it was contaminated, and said, hey, do what you would normally do if this were your boat, if you're a boater, or any boat going through the launch that day. So the first part in doing these experimental boat inspections was deciding how to actually spike the boat. What would we put on it? Where would we place it? And you can see here on the left side of the screen, these are the locations that we chose and the species that we chose. So all of these locations and species were standardized, so all participants saw the same species spiked in the same locations. So we chose to use plants, zebra mussels, spiny water flea, and residual water based upon what inspectors and other experts were telling us, like these are the invasive species of interest, and these where they're getting caught on the boat. And I also want to mention that we used dead or surrogate AIS for this, so we didn't introduce any risk of spread with this research. So we used, for the plants, we used coontail, which is a native lookalike to the Eurasian, invasive Eurasian water milfoil. We used dried out zebra mussel shells, and then also spiny water flea preserved in ethanol. And then for the residual water, we really wanted to mimic the risk of microscopic AIS. So, things like bait fish diseases or zebra mussel veligers, that can be a risk with that residual water. So here's how we actually spike the boat. You can see kind of a layout color-coded here with this boat, but I wanted to give you another view of that so you can see, this is what a participant would have seen when they approached this boat. So you can see our plants here in 6 locations, our zebra mussels in 2, residual water in 1, and the bait bucket and spiny water flea in the last. So as you can see, the plants were pretty easily, draped over different structures on the boat, but we needed to figure out how to get these pesky little zebra mussels and spiny water flea to stick on the boat and not fall off during the trial. So what I did was I went down to my local art supply store and found these really useful little removable glue dots. They're transparent and they don't leave any residue on the boat. So they were really good for this trial when we were doing a lot of different trials where we had to move things and put things back on. And they kind of mimic the resistance of bissel thread removement with zebra mussels being stuck on the boat. So these really worked great for this study. All right, so once we figured out how to spike the boat, we then had to figure out, who are we going to recruit? How are we going to recruit them? And we decided to recruit participants that would best represent the preventions in question. So we recruited boaters to represent the effectiveness of boater education programs, inspectors to represent the effectiveness of watercraft inspection programs, and subsequently decontaminators for the effectiveness of hot water decontamination. So once we had these participants recruited, they said, hey, yeah, we'll participate. We then had to figure out how to evaluate them. So the first step in doing that was reading them a standardized script and scenario to give them an idea that the boat had been in an infested water, and they should do what they would normally do in that situation. And then, knowing that, the participant then completed or started their trial, and we had 2 evaluators observing their actual inspection and removal efforts. And the first evaluator recorded, what items they were removing from the boat the ones that we had placed on the boat. And the second evaluator was recording where folks were looking and touching on the boat, even if we hadn't placed something there. So obviously we couldn't just cake the whole boat with invasives because that's unrealistic. So we still wanted to account for those locations where we couldn't place invasive species. And I know, some of you might be sitting here thinking, Nichole, you're sitting there watching someone complete an inspection. Don't you think that's going to cause them to try harder or do better? And we do realize it's an inherent observer bias. However, even when we place things on the boat, participants didn't remove everything that we had spiked. So we're really treating this as the baseline data for the best case scenario for removal. So this process of visually observing the different groups worked great for all 3 levels of participants. However, we needed this extra evaluation step to be able to determine, how effective is the hot water being sprayed on the boat by the decontaminators. So what we did is we asked them to spray lava on the boat, which you can see here. I'm just kidding. We actually used a thermal imager to record the temperature and duration of water being sprayed on the boat. We compared it to the UMPS protocol, which is a 60 degrees Celsius spray for 10 seconds. So we sectioned out the boat, as you can see here on the right-hand side of the screen, and recorded the longest duration and hottest temperature of water being sprayed on each section to then quantify decontamination as a whole. So you can see this decontaminator doing a pretty good job of decontaminating the boat. So once we had this great data from these inspectors and boaters and decontaminators, after they were done with their trials, we had them complete a post-inspection questionnaire, which kind of got at asked some questions about their background, education, beliefs, demographics, those types of things. So we could correlate with that with their removal abilities. So we could see, how is that impacting their removal abilities? And I won't get into the results from this survey specifically. It wasn't explicitly part of my thesis work. It's part of a separate manuscript. If you'd like to see those results, you can talk to me afterwards. So we completed this post-inspection questionnaire. So once all was said and done, we then had this wonderful data set from all of these different groups across the region on removal efforts. And we had to figure out how are we gonna statistically analyze these. We decided to go with a binomial mixed effects regression model because, as I just previously mentioned, every person is different. They have a different education, have a different background, and we had to account for that. So we used a mixed effects regression model using random intercepts for each participant to avoid pseudo-replicating that data. And it was a binomial model because it was either they removed it from a location or they didn't, so binomial data. And then we were comparing removal to 6 fixed effects with 3 main effects being participant type, so did a boater or an inspector remove more, AIS type, were spiny water fleas or were zebra mussels better removed, that types of thing. And then we also compared it to region. So we separated the participants out into the metro area region and the outstate region to make regional comparisons in removal as well. And then we did 2-way interactions for those 3 main effects as well. And then finally, once we had the results from that mixed effects regression model, we did some post hoc Tukey's analysis to further parse apart differences between the groups, make some pairwise comparisons to see the directionality in those differences too. All right, now's my cue to take a drink, pause. Make sure everyone's still awake. In the back there, you guys still awake? Okay, great. So now we're going to get into the results from chapter 1, which I think are really interesting. So I'm excited to share these with you guys. All right, so first, let's talk about where we did, who we recruited, or where we went, who we recruited. And you can see from the map here, these are all the public accesses that we collected information from. We were able to do these experimental inspections with 144 different participants. And you can see the participants, the boat launches separated out into the metro area region in the red dots, and then the outstate area region in the blue dots. And then we tried to get an equal number of participants from each region, which you can see further parsed out in these tables here. All right, so what did we find with these experimental inspections? I'm sure that's what everyone is here to listen to. First, I'll just go over some mean percentages that we experienced with these. So first, boaters were around 56% effective in their removal efforts of what we had placed on the boat. Inspectors around 79%, and decontaminators around 84% effective. So, we also saw statistical differences with participant type. So we saw that trained inspectors and decontaminators were significantly more effective at removing AIS from the boat than boaters were. However, I do want to mention that boaters were by no means ineffective. 56 is way better than 0% removed. And boaters play a critical role in removing and preventing AIS spread when inspectors can't be present at launches. All right, and furthermore, we saw differences by region. So we'll go over the boaters first. So we saw that Outstate boaters were a little less effective in their removal efforts compared to metro area boaters, likely due to the fact that once you get outstate, you have a lot of ground to cover, a lot of lakes to put education at, and you can't just cover all of them. So maybe some of the messaging isn't reaching all of those outstate boaters. And then we saw similar patterns, but in the reverse direction for inspectors, with outstate inspectors doing a little bit better than those in the in-state region. And this, what the data shows is this is likely due to one specific invasive species, and that is the spiny water flea. So we noticed that the outstate inspectors were much better at finding and removing the spiny water flea than the metro area ones were. And this is most likely due to the fact that spiny water flea are in those outstate areas. The inspectors are experiencing them, but in the metro areas, they are not. So these could further explain, these regional differences in removal that we experienced. All right. So we also saw that there was differences by AIS type, with plants being the easiest to see and remove. So just to orient you to this graph here, I'll reveal more of it to you in a minute. So these are the 6 locations that we put plants on the boat. And you can see that the x-axis is the percent of AIS removed, by the y-axis, a specific participant group. So overall, participant groups did really well with removing plants, anywhere from like 80 to 100%, give or take. However, this differs when we look at other types of invasive species. Specifically, the zebra mussels on the motor mount were a location and species that people really struggled with. Similarly, with the spiny water flea on the last eyelet of the fishing rod, and less so, but still present with the residual water in the bait bucket. So overall, plants were the easiest to see and remove by all participant groups, likely due to the fact that plants have a draping morphology, and you can kind of see them hanging off, where zebra mussels are kind of hidden in nooks and crannies. So that could explain these differences. All right, so I'm going to reveal these plots to you in a minute, but I wanted you to recall back to when I said that we recorded where folks were looking and touching on the boat, even if we hadn't placed something there. So these are going to be the results from that for only the boaters. I just wanted to keep it concise and talk about just boaters here. So to orient you, the x-axis is the percent of boater participants that completed a specific action on the boat. They touched, looked, or overlooked a specific boat location on the y-axis. So what did we find with this data? We saw that there were some areas of success, and these were the hull and the trailer on each side of the boat, the starboard and the port side of the boat. So as you can see by these green bars, lots of boaters were looking and touching these locations pretty closely. However, there were some areas on the flip side, and these were the floor, the lights and wiring, the motor mount, and the transducer. So you can see that with these red bars that 40 to 50% of boaters simply overlooked these locations, or maybe they didn't know to look at these locations, and then another 30 to 40% or so only looked at these locations and didn't touch them, which is important to feel for those sandpaper like zebra mussels that you can't see with the naked eye. So these might be areas we want to focus on for future education and outreach efforts. All right, and finally, we'll get into the results from that lava-like thermal imagery that I showed you all earlier. I'll reveal to you in a minute a boat heat map per se, but just to orient you to show you the color scheme that we're going to be dealing with. So the colors are representing the percent of decontaminator participants that's successfully decontaminated a boat section. So darker colors are going to represent a lower sufficiency, and lighter colors represent a higher sufficiency. So what did we find with this? Overall, we saw that there was a lot of variability with decontaminators removal process. We saw that some people started at the front of the boat, some people started at the back, some people, looked inside of the boat, some people didn't, some people didn't know if they should do the equipment or not. So overall, a lot of variability in the processes that were done to complete a decontamination. But one key thing that we really took away from all of the decontaminators is that most of them were focusing their efforts on the underside of the hull. And you can see that with the underside being, higher on the spectrum than some of the other boat locations. And I think this is really correlative with, we tell decontaminators to focus below the waterline where AIS, where zebra mussels are likely to be attached. And this is showing that. So overall, I did want to mention that overall, we saw that section sufficiency was pretty low, with the average decontaminator decontaminating under a quarter of the boat section sufficiently. However, this wasn't likely due to human error, but more so equipment failure. We noticed that the units kind of sinuate in temperature where they'll kick on, they'll meet that minimum threshold needed to kill zebra mussels, and then they'll kick off and they'll go just below that threshold. And I do want to recognize that, there might be lower thresholds in time needed to kill other invasive species that aren't as resistant as zebra mussels. But overall, this is what we saw with the decontaminators. And we've been in contact with state and other entities to kind of think about a pathway forward for, upping our units to really meet the needs of specifically for hot water decontamination. All right. Finally, this will be the last plot from chapter 1 of this. So we also recorded how long it took participants to complete their inspection process. We didn't say there was a time limit or time them, and they didn't know they were being timed, but these are the results from that. So we saw that generally, as participants spent more time with their inspection process, generally the better they did. And of course, this is up to a certain point, and it has trade-offs in that you can't keep a boater at the launch all day, inspecting every nook and cranny of the boat. They're not going to be happy with that. But these are the general trends we're seeing. And I think this could probably be incorporated into future messaging, just telling inspectors and boaters to take their time with their inspection process, take a second look around the boat, and you can get this much better with your removal efforts. Another thing we noted that was with the decontaminators, the increase in percentage removal effectiveness between inspectors and decontaminators, it was a 79 to an 84%. That increase wasn't necessarily due to that added hot water decontamination step, but more so that we observed the decontaminators slowing down during their decontamination process and seeing things a second time and actually removing them by hand a second time going around the boat. So this really further emphasizes that the more time you spend, generally the better you do. All right, so what are some key takeaways from chapter 1? We noticed that there was variability in removal by participant type, region, AIS type. We saw that in the future, maybe more practical decontamination protocols and equipment will be needed. And generally, the more time they spent on their inspection, the better they did. All right, so we have these wonderful data about effectiveness, but we have to think about two pieces to the puzzle here. So, managers have to work on a budget. They don't have unlimited resources and funding, so we have to think about cost effectiveness when moving forward with prevention planning. So in comes chapter 2, looking at the costs of AIS preventions. So when we first approached this chapter, we had to think about, generally what are Minnesotan counties spending on these 3 AIS preventions in question. So the first step in doing this was reaching out to the DNR and asking for summary data from them. So they have a voluntary reporting program where counties can report to them what they're spending on their prevention plans. So we looked at that, we dug through it, and we saw general spending trends and also which counties were reporting with high detail and few data gaps. And those are the counties we decided to reach out to host interviews with to gather itemized cost information, which you can see the itemized categories here for both boater education and inspection and decontamination. So we hosted about 1-hour Zoom interviews with these counties to gather this information. And we also asked for how many interventions are they actually completing in a year? So how many inspectors are they hiring? How many inspections are they doing? That type of information. So I wanted to show to you what results from one of those counties might look like. So we're gonna go through a case study of Cass County, Minnesota, which is in the north central region. Thanks to Cass County folks, if you're on the call. Thanks for letting us use you as a case study. I'm excited to show what we found. So, these are results from Cass County, what they spend itemized out by these different levels of these 3 preventions. And then we also had how many inspections and how many decontaminations they're actually completing as well. I do want to mention that this boater estimate was not obtained from counties, but we needed to figure out, how many boaters are actually, being experienced in a county for the price that they're spending. So what we did is we used a boater network model that was created before I was even here by another grad student. But basically what this model does is it takes into account watercraft inspection data. So a watercraft inspector will sit at a launch and will ask boaters moving through where they're coming from and where they're planning to go to next. And from that data, we were able to kind of predict where voters were moving throughout the state of Minnesota, to then predict how many voters is each county experiencing. So that's where that number comes from. All right, so we gathered this type of information for 19 different counties, and here are our average county expenditures. So we noticed a lot of variability between counties. Each county is allocated a little bit different information or different amount of money. So we did notice variability there. And then we also had the amount of interventions they're actually experiencing on average as well. So, it's important to think about both, the costs and the number of interventions being done moving forward as we think about the cost per intervention. So just to orient you, so we use the cost as a numerator here and the number of interventions as a denominator to obtain this plot right here. So this is the cost per intervention for our 3 preventions in question. I want to note that this is a log scale. So we did experience extreme differences between these different expenses, with a boater trip costing around 40 cents per boater trip, an inspection around 20 bucks, and then a decontamination around $362. And I know some people see that $362 and they're like, man, that is a lot of money. And it is a lot of money. Decontamination units cost $20,000 and up to start. And then decontaminators are also usually paid a higher wage compared to other level 1 inspectors. So this is what we observed from those county expenditures. But I do want to recognize that, costs might not be as black and white as this plot shows to you. As you do more inspections in a day, your cost per inspection is going to go down. So we do recognize that. However, these are the averages that we were seeing with the data we collected. Okay, so once we had this great cost effectiveness data, we then had to figure out, how do we get this out to managers in a usable way where they can take advantage of it and really, bolster their prevention program plans. So I'm going to introduce to you the tool that we use to do this and what we're adding to it. So in comes the AIS Explorer. I do want to mention the AIS Explorer was not created by me. This project is bigger than just me, but the AIS Explorer has been around for a long time. I'm going to introduce to you what this tool actually is. It's basically an online dashboard that helps with prevention program planning. I'll first introduce you to the tool and then what we're going to add to it. So, the AIS Explorer is live right now. You can go to this link. I wouldn't recommend you all go at the same time because it might crash. So please don't do that. But the AIS Explorer is basically, like I said, an online dashboard that's composed of 2 tabs currently. The first tab forecasts the spread of AIS, or the spread of risky boat movement, which is, a boater moving from an uninfested lake to an infested lake. So that's what the first tab kind of forecasts out, which you can see with this spider-like showing on the screen. The second tab then gives you a prioritized ranked list of lakes where you should prioritize placing watercraft inspectors based upon how many risky boaters a lake is experiencing. So these are the 2 tabs that comprise the AIS Explorer right now. It's already a super powerful tool in itself. But with the data I collected, we're creating a new tab called the Intervention Impact tab. And here's just a little schematic. You're not meant to be able to read this, but this is what it'll look like when you go into it. It's basically a 5-stage process where managers can create hypothetical prevention scenarios where they place different interventions. So they can place boater education, place watercraft inspectors at lakes within any county of choice. And they go through this 5-stage process to then get a summary that kind of describes to them the cost benefit of their prevention plan. And I won't get into this, but I will say that, I'm not an R-Shiny expert. I'm not a modeler. So, this tool was definitely like a collaborative effort. But I do want to define where my role comes into this tool. And that's with the effectiveness and the cost tab. So as a county manager or any user is going through this tab or going through these 5 stages, and they get to the effectiveness tab, they might say like, man, I don't know how effective the boaters in my county are. Like, that's a really difficult question. And it is a really difficult question. So what I've done with my effectiveness and cost estimates is incorporated them into these two tabs as the default effectiveness and the default cost. So users can have something to fall back to that's backed by science as they go through this process to achieve their summary at the end. And I'll just showcase to you what an example summary might look like. This is a simplified version. The summary output gives you a lot more than just this, but basically it tells you how much your prevention plan is going to cost in total, and then split out by the interventions that you're applying, and also what the reduction in risk is. So the user can see how many new infestations are predicted to happen under the status quo, and then how many are expected to happen under the intervention scenario that they apply. So they can really see the cost benefit of their plan in total. So like I said, this is a really concise showing of what this tool can do. So I wanted to further show you a case study of really how impactful this tool can be. So we're gonna go back to our case county. So Cass County has around $500,000 to spend on their prevention plan each year. So let's say Cass County said, we're not going to employ any interventions. And this is hypothetical. Cass County, this is in no way reflects what Cass County is going to do. But let's say Cass County didn't spend anything. The tool would take that into account, and it would say, you're expected to have 16 new zebra mussel infestations in the next 5 years if you don't do anything. So let's say Cass County said, no way, we can't do that. We are not having these zebra mussels here. And they decided to spend that $500 in a split that looks something like this: 75% spent on inspections, 20% on decontamination, and 5% on boater education. They can input that through that 5-stage process that I explained earlier, and they can see, the number of zebra mussel infestations decreased to around 10 or 11%. Like, that's interesting. But what if Cass County said, that's still not good enough. We don't want that many zebra mussels coming in and infesting our lakes. They could go through and they could change how they're spending their money on the different preventions. They can see, maybe they don't have enough money to spend on a decon unit, so they don't, and they do a 50-50 split between inspections and boater education. They can see what that tool is going to do for them, and obviously that decreases it by a lot. So the reality is they can really play around with these spending scenarios. Let's say they did have some money to spend on decontamination, so they did, and they employed that. They can really see what's going to happen. So as we can see, the way you spend your money on these interventions does matter. Additionally, I wanted to highlight that this tool is really customizable in that you can change the effectiveness and costs of your interventions. So let's say Cass County said, we didn't employ a lot of education this year. Like, we think our boaters are a little less than average in their removal efforts. So they can go through the tool and maybe change boater effectiveness to 20% rather than the 56% default that we have in there. And they can see what's going to happen with that. Additionally, maybe they think their decontaminators are top-notch, 100%, doing great things all the time. They can set that effectiveness to 100 and see what difference that makes. So ultimately, this tool really is showcasing, how preventions are really different from one another and how changing what you're doing across the landscape does have an impact. All right, so in summary, we'll go over what we've learned from chapter 2, that we saw that there was variable spending habits between different counties. We also saw that spending more or less on each prevention, which I just showed in the previous slide, does have an impact. And I also want to mention that stakeholder engagement was extremely vital in this process. As we were talking to counties, we kind of got an idea of what their needs were from this tool and how we could move forward with it so that it would benefit, all parties of interest. So these are key takeaways from chapter 2. All right, so let's put this all together. We have chapter 1, chapter 2. With chapter 1, we learned that the preventions differ in effectiveness, but each still play a role in prevention planning. Chapter 2, we saw that costs are variable, and we're helping develop a tool to better deal with these complexities and cost effectiveness moving forward. Speaking about moving forward, let's get into some future directions. Where can we go from here with this work? What first comes to my mind is, these methods are really transferable in that we can really test other preventions and easily incorporate them into the AS Explorer as well. And some of the preventions that come to mind are canine AIS detection. I think these dogs are the most awesome dogs, and it's my dream to meet one day. So any state folks in the room, if you can make that happen, I'd be super stoked. Also, we could test, CD3 stations. They're becoming increasingly more prevalent, not only in the state of Minnesota, but also across the nation. And then finally, targeted voter education campaigns as well. So we can test these other preventions and then incorporate them into the AIS Explorer. All right, where else can we go? So we also noted that what would be helpful for improving decon effectiveness in the future would be for a risk assessment to be done to tell decontaminators like what sections of the boat are high risk. And this is where you should be focusing your decontamination efforts. I think that would really help with standardizing, how decontaminators go about their process. And then in addition to this, kind of moving forward with manufacturing a unit that's specifically designed for the unique needs of hot water decontamination. All right, and then finally, moving forward with the AIS Explorer, we're expected to expand to other states. I know within the next few years, we're expected to expand to Wisconsin. So this tool can be used by other managers other than just Minnesotan managers. And then also adding other AIS to this tool. So right now, the Intervention Impact tab is incorporating zebra mussel infestations and starry stonewort infestations. But like I mentioned, there's a lot of other invasive species that are impacting Minnesota, Eurasian water milfoil, spiny water flea. So adding those into the tool would be really helpful for managers moving forward. All right, we've got to our summary slide. And this is where I want to just emphasize, I can't emphasize enough that this project wasn't to say that we should be implementing one prevention over another. Like, no, that's not what this was meant to do. Each prevention has an extremely important role. Boaters are really important when we can't have inspectors at launches. There's over 10,000 lakes in Minnesota. We can't man them all. So boaters come in that situation. And then watercraft inspection is a really great form of both education and a form of manual removal. So inspectors are sitting at launches, boaters are seeing them, they're getting the idea that AIS are an issue and maybe I should do something about it. So, and also inspectors are a pretty fair cost for that removal and education. And then finally, hot water decontamination is extremely vital when we have these high risk scenarios where, microscopic AIS might be present in residual water or zebra mussels might be caked on the boat that you can't remove by hand. So, hot water decontamination is vital in those situations. So really each prevention really plays a role in prevention program planning. And we've kind of highlighted a way to deal with those differences in a way where managers can move forward and get the best bang for their buck with their prevention plans. So with that, I'd like to thank my collaborators and committee members from all across the Great Lakes region. Of course, my advisor, Dr. Nick Phelps. None of this would be possible without them. And then also some UMN faculty and staff that have helped me create cool figures like that heat map you saw. And then of course, my lab members, WRS peers, Macer grad fellows, office mates. And last but not least, my partner, Tyler, who's been with me through the highs and lows through this. Thank you to all of you. I'm so appreciative. And with that, I did have for those of you that are wildlife in the room, I didn't forget about you. There's a wildlife kind of AIS meme mix. But with that, I'd be happy to take any questions. Alex.
I'll kick you off with something of a naive question. Right. I really don't know how different boats are from each other, but I'm thinking about it like someone comes up and it's like, come clean this car. And I've never owned a car or anything like that. And it's not like my car. Mm-hmm. Obviously inspectors have to inspect a wide range of boats. Mm-hmm. So they might have a familiarity with where to look on a different range, like a wide range of different boats. Do you think boaters were somewhat less effective in part because of that unfamiliarity? Like maybe they have been excellent at cleaning their own boat, but now you've thrown an entirely different boat at them.
Yeah. So for those of you on the Zoom call, Alex is asking, we used a fishing boat for all of these trials. Like, some folks might be more familiar with other boats. And we do realize that is kind of an issue that we did want to keep it standard across all participants. However, I do want to mention that with that post-inspection questionnaire, we did ask, what were you doing on the water today and what kind of boat were you using? And the majority of participants were using a fishing boat, which is the boat we used. So, a lot of participants did say they were familiar with a fishing boat, and ours was kind of the basic model for a fishing boat. So I think we tried to encapsulate that, but, there are some variability with, other people might have a big pontoon with these big pontoon floats that they might have to, know how to look at and inspect. So yeah, there was some differences there. And I think it would be cool to do future research like this, but using different types of boat. I think you could find some really cool results there. Yeah, good question.
You have some hands raised on that. If you want to
hands raised. Yes.
Meg is first.
Meg, hi Meg, you can go ahead.
Hi Nichole, really good job, really proud. I wondered if you looked at or thought about like any of the possible synergies of combinations of interventions, like if you had decon and hand inspection or something like that, or can you imagine any way those different types of interventions might interact with each other?
Yeah, so very good question. So actually the decontaminators did do a hand removal process before their actual hot water. I should have made that a little more clear. So decontaminators do a hand inspection and then they move on to do a hot water decontamination. And we did see the removal from, I'm not going to skip back to all the slides because it'll, yeah. But we did see that inspectors doing just a hand removal were about 79% effective, and decontaminators doing that hand removal plus the added decon do an 84% removal effectiveness. So we did kind of see those synergistic effects with the decon efforts. Does that answer your question a little bit? But it would be cool to see how education kind of plays into that. So
yeah, I wondered if it would make sense for like a county to have decon in some places but not in others, just like thinking about how to apply it in combination across the landscape is kind of interesting.
Yeah, and that's exactly what the AS Explorer is going to allow people to do. So that's what I'm super stoked about. Coming the next version, Intervention Impact, is coming within the next few months, so feel free to check it out once it's out. We have a question here in the room. Ed?
So all education and outreach is not created equal. I mean, the lightning rod example is the toilet paper, right? I don't know if you're familiar with it.
I am familiar.
So thinking about what you learned about boaters and their ineffectiveness, what kind of education and outreach do you think would be most effective for boaters to move that needle? Yeah,
that's a really good question. Honestly, for me, I think that moving forward, what I've experienced from, inspectors telling me how their experiences with boaters were, is that a lot of these inspectors have been around inspecting 10 years and they say it's immensely better than what it was 10 years ago. Like boaters are starting to receive information like, this is the new norm. We should be doing watercraft inspections. So I think just having things out there and like getting to the crowds and just telling them, and then also having friends telling friends, just really making it a new norm that this is what we should be doing. This is part of how we boat and how we recreate in Minnesota to keep our waters clean. Good question.
So Spearin B was next on.
Spearin?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Spearin.
Hey there.
Hi.
Sorry, my name's Brendan. I'm from the Fisheries Oceans Canada's AIS core program. Hey there. Yeah, I had 2 quick questions for you. Maybe not quick actually, but that's okay. The first question is related to drain plugs and if those were in scope for your project, and if not, why not? And then my second question is, your presentation really had me thinking about how we train our staff at our inspection stations, and was wondering if this is something you would suggest we all should do around testing our staff and their efficacy in the future. Thank you.
Yeah, so the first question about the drain plugs, we didn't explicitly place a specific AIS in that drain plug, but we did have an evaluator recording if someone was looking, touching, or overlooking that drain plug location. And it didn't come up as one of the like areas of success or areas of concern. It was kind of in the middle somewhere. But we did address, are people checking their drain plug for different invasive species? So yeah, that's for the first question. The second question was thinking about, you know, should other people be doing this? And my answer is absolutely yes. You know, it only takes a 2-year GRA to be able to do this study. Like, absolutely, it can be implemented. You know, I have the methods we used, the evaluation forms we used available on the data repository for University of Minnesota's site. Like, I could send that to you afterwards if you'd like to have those, but it's, you know, it just needs the funding, and it's definitely, you know, the framework is already set up to do it, and you can absolutely do it. So hopefully that answered both of your questions in a concise manner.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, we have a question in the room, Mike.
Yeah, at the beginning, you showed us a picture of biologists out of the field. And I have thought a lot about that through my career, bringing sometimes complex gear between water bodies. And I'm curious if you could comment on what from your study we can learn about the risk posed by biologists, whether it's research or management biologists, and the nuance of their work.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a risk. You know, I have done a lot of fisheries biology work, and we have these, you know, trap nets and pike nets that get all sorts of gunk in them. And yeah, like, there is a risk with that. We just have to be super careful about, you know, knowing which lakes we're going to and from, which ones are infested, which ones aren't, and just making sure we're not moving those things. For me, the most effective, like really effective form is drying. And I know that, you know, you can't wait that long to sit your equipment out to dry all the time. So my advice would be to have a rotation of equipment where you can, you know, let some dry for a while and use the ones that have already been drying. So really having a back stock of equipment that is cleaned and deconned sufficiently. So that would be my answer to that.
Thanks.
Yeah. Questions online?
Yep. Anna is next.
Anna, you can go ahead.
Hi, Nichole. Great job. I guess I only have really one question, and it's really a quick one. Was there like a certain technique that seemed to be doing better, and people would, you know, use the hot water, like going from top to bottom of the boat, or, you know, front to back? And like, was there a most common way that they did this? Or yeah, so that's my main question.
Yeah. So there was like I said, a lot of variability. There wasn't really one common way. Like, usually decontaminator just like started doing their job wherever they were standing by the boat. But sorry, what was the second part of that question? Just,
I guess technique wise, was there a certain way that did better? Yeah.
No, we didn't observe any differences in, you know, the technique that was done. Really just, you know, it came down to really those units, like, were those units reaching those thresholds? You know, we did have some decontaminators that were, again, bringing in how long it took them to do their decon. We did have some decontaminators that were really quick with their decon, where they just like went around the boat quick. And obviously that wasn't as effective, because you need to spend time decontaminating every section for 10 seconds, which, as you realize, is also really, really, really difficult, because you cannot sit there and do every single part of the boat for 10 seconds. And this is kind of where I have some qualms with decontamination, is that, you know, the protocol states every section for 10 seconds, which is really difficult. And like I said, having a risk assessment for being able to know which sections to focus on would be helpful moving forward. But no, we didn't see any increase in effectiveness for any one specific type of procedure that was completed. Question in the room, Dan?
Yeah, it seems like you now know some weak links in the process. So do you feel like you could capture that in like a 3-minute YouTube video or a sign or something that can be made available to access it?
For what aspect? Voter education, decon, like
for voters.
For voter education?
Yeah, for voters to decontaminate and inspect their.
Yeah. So for me, like I said, I can really see the slow down sign, like take 2 minutes more than you normally would. I can see that being super effective for new signage, new messaging, moving forward with voters, because, you know, voters, they get off the water, and they want to just go, get home and relax. But, you know, it really is imperative that they're taking their time with their inspection and seeing these little things that they might miss with a simple swoop around the boat.
But it seems like also maybe there's some spots that people aren't even thinking to look at.
Yeah,
like
no.
the fishing rod.
Yeah, definitely. The fishing rod is one of them. especially as we start to deal with AIS that are risk on fishing equipment, mostly spiny water fleas. Definitely we could give a sign like, these are what you're doing well, and in the future, like these are areas we might want to focus on, and then maybe have like a picture of spiny water flea just caked on a just like showing like what the detrimental impacts are for these specific locations that are high risk that usually aren't being checked. So, but like I said with Ed's comment is just making this a new norm of like these are the locations you should be checking regularly. And maybe even having a sign at boat launches that show these hot spots where AIS are likely to be. So hopefully that answers your question. Mike has a comment.
This is the follow-up for Dan.
Yeah.
When I saw your sort of effectiveness curve with time, I was thinking of those timers at car washes that you could like start a countdown from 7 minutes. Like,
yeah.
If you leave before this, you're not giving.
Exactly. Like just having like a certain time that said like, just stick it out, like keep looking for this amount of time, even like set a timer and then go, and like just something like that in the future, I think could be helpful. Yeah.
Doug has a question.
Doug Jensen online.
Yeah, thanks, Nichole. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, thanks for your presentation. So your research is addressing an issue that I've had for a long time, going back almost 30 years in addressing aquatic invasive species, and that is the efficacy of boat wash stations and decontamination. We've long recognized that the cost for decontamination would be much higher than that of education. In reflecting upon that effectiveness curve that you have between boaters and inspectors and decons, there wasn't much difference in terms of the overall effectiveness between decon and inspectors. Is there a point of no return in looking at those curves? What's the take-home message from that? Thanks.
Yeah, very good question. So my response to that is that an inspector sitting at a launch does not have some sort of special X-ray vision to be able to see if there's, zebra mussel veliger stuck or, some sort of microscopic AIS. So like I said, those decontaminations are really still vital in those situations when they're employed effectively. Inspector cannot catch those little things that a hot water decon would. So I would say that, while decon is a really high cost, moving forward with them in an effective manner would be really helpful, especially with, designing a unit specifically made for decon. I know that we have been, I did experience some units that were stationary units. They were hot water boiler systems sitting in a shed, and those units did seem to not sinuate in temperature. So maybe moving forward with something of that manner to, have decons. I'm not sure the cost of those hot water boilers compared to the mobile units, but moving forward with just a unit that's really going to work effectively to kill those microscopic AIS, because inspectors can, that's where inspectors do fall short a little bit and where decon comes into play.
Yeah, thanks, Nichole. Follow-up question. Do you think an argument could be made that the investment in education versus decon would be a better investment?
Yeah, so like I said, we're not saying one is better than the other. Each play their role. I will say that boater education is a great form of, increasing prevention efforts across the landscape. Boaters are moving everywhere. They're transient, they're so dynamic. And just having, those boaters educated on different prevention measures is a way to get prevention, out to the masses and out in those, very remote locations where boaters are going to, where inspectors aren't. So I wouldn't say that we should be employing one over another. I will say that each has their advantage though, for sure. Others in the room, others online?
We have one more online. That can be the last question.
Okay, last question from Reese, you said? Bruce.
Hi there, Bruce, Beltrami County. I think you answered my question though, because during the presentation, you said there was some equipment problems with the decons, so their effectiveness was lowered. And I'm assuming that's because they vary too much in temperature. But was it anything else or?
I mean, we did have a few decontaminators that just went a little too quickly around the boat with their decon process, but mostly it was due to that sinuation and temperature that we observed. So yeah, you kind of explained that well, but yeah, that's what we've observed with the decon.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Great job.
Yeah, thanks for waking everybody up now. Thanks, everyone.